A billionaire's baby cried for hours on the plane, until a shy woman did the unthinkable. The cabin pressure felt heavier than it should have been. Flight 447 to New York was packed. Business travelers typing frantically on laptops, tourists clutching neck pillows, children kicking seatbacks in restless rhythm. But none of that mattered anymore. All anyone could hear was the crying. The baby's wails cut through the stale, recycled air like a siren. Raw, relentless, inconsolable. It had been 40 minutes since takeoff, and the sound showed no sign of stopping. Passengers exchanged glances, some sympathetic, most annoyed. A man in first class pressed noise-cancelling headphones tighter against his ears. A woman 2 rows back sighed loud enough to be heard over the chaos. And in seat 12A, Ethan Moore sat frozen. He was 32 years old, though he looked older. Sharp jawline, dark circles beneath steel-grey eyes, shoulders that carried the weight of empires. His suit was immaculate, charcoal Tom Ford with a silk tie loosened just enough to suggest he'd been traveling too long. His black hair, usually perfectly styled, fell slightly across his forehead as he rocked the baby in his arms with mechanical precision. But nothing worked. The baby, barely 6 months old, tiny fists clenched, face red from crying, refused to be soothed. Ethan bounced him gently. He checked the diaper. He tried the bottle again. He whispered things that felt hollow even as they left his lips. "Shh, Liam, please, just stop." His voice cracked on the last word. A flight attendant approached with practiced sympathy, offering a blanket and warm milk. Ethan accepted both with a nod that said, "Thank you and leave me alone" at the same time. She retreated. Around him the judgment grew thicker. Whispers, side eyes, a teenage girl recording on her phone until her mother swatted it down. Someone muttered, "Can't he hire a nanny?" loud enough for Ethan to hear. He didn't respond, he just kept rocking, kept trying, kept failing. Because this wasn't about money, this wasn't about control. This was about a man who'd lost his wife a year ago and still didn't know how to be a father without her. 12 rows back in seat 24C, Grace Adams sat perfectly still. She was 28, slight and soft-featured, with gentle brown eyes that watched the world more than they participated in it. Her hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and she wore a cream-colored cardigan over a plain dress. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. The kind of woman who blended into crowds not because she wanted to hide, but because she'd learned long ago that quiet people survived longer. She'd been listening to the baby cry for 40 minutes, and it hurt. Not because of the noise. Grace worked with children every day at St. Catherine's Community Nursery. Crying didn't bother her. But this cry was different. It wasn't hunger or discomfort. It was loneliness, desperation, a plea that no one seemed to hear. Her fingers twisted the edge of her cardigan as she watched the man in 12A struggle. She could see it from here, the exhaustion in his movements, the way his shoulders slumped forward, the barely contained panic in his eyes every time the baby's wails intensified. She wanted to help, but she was nobody. A stranger, a woman in economy who had no business approaching a man who clearly traveled in a different world. What if he was offended? What if people thought she was trying to... The baby's cry hit a new pitch, sharper, more broken. Grace closed her eyes. Some cries can only be silenced by love. Her grandmother used to say that. Grace didn't know if it was true, but she knew this. She couldn't sit here anymore. She unbuckled her seatbelt. The aisle felt longer than it was. Every step forward, Grace felt the weight of eyes on her. Passengers turned. A businessman lowered his newspaper. The flight attendant paused mid-service, watching. Grace's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept walking. When she reached row 12, she stopped. Ethan didn't notice her at first. He was staring down at Liam, whispering something desperate and inaudible. The baby thrashed in his arms, tiny hands grasping at nothing. "Excuse me." Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the engine noise. Ethan looked up. For a moment they just stared at each other. His eyes were grey and hollow, rimmed red from sleeplessness. Hers were warm, hesitant, but steady. Grace swallowed. "I work with babies, every day, at a nursery. May I try?" Ethan blinked. Around them the cabin went quieter. Not silent. Babies don't allow for silence. But quieter. People leaned in, curious, skeptical. Ethan glanced down at Liam, then back at Grace. Something flickered in his expression. Doubt, hope, exhaustion. "You don't have to—" "I know," Grace said gently, "but I'd like to, if you'll let me." There was no judgment in her voice, no pity, just an offer. Ethan hesitated for 3 more seconds, then he stood. And carefully, slowly, he placed his son into the arms of a stranger. The moment Liam settled against Grace's chest, something shifted. She didn't bounce him, didn't whisper urgently. She just held him, one hand supporting his head, the other resting lightly on his back. She swayed, barely, side to side, a rhythm so natural it looked like breathing. And then she hummed. It wasn't a lullaby anyone would recognize. No lyrics, no melody from a music box. Just a low, gentle tune that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it filled the space around them like warmth. Liam's cries stuttered. Grace kept humming, her eyes half closed, her body moving in that slow, eternal sway. The baby's fists unclenched, his breathing slowed. And then, silence. Liam's eyes fluttered shut. His tiny body relaxed completely, melting into Grace's arms like he'd found the one place in the world that made sense. The cabin erupted. Applause started in the back rows and rippled forward, tentative at first, then genuine. A woman near the window wiped her eyes. The businessman nodded in approval. Even the teenager with the phone smiled. But Grace didn't hear any of it. She was looking down at the baby in her arms, her expression soft and distant, like she was holding something sacred. And Ethan. Ethan hadn't moved. He stood there in the aisle, frozen, staring at the woman who'd just done what he couldn't. His throat tightened. For the first time in a year, he felt something other than emptiness. He didn't know what it was yet. Gratitude, maybe. Relief. Or something deeper, quieter, more dangerous. Grace finally looked up at him, her smile small and uncertain. "He just needed to feel safe," she whispered. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came, because in that moment, looking at this stranger holding his son, he realized something devastating. So did I. The flight attendant approached quietly, gesturing toward Grace's seat. "Miss, I'm sorry, but you'll need to return to your seat for landing procedures." Grace nodded, carefully transferring Liam back into Ethan's arms. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake, his little fingers curling around his father's shirt. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice rough. Grace smiled, shy, fleeting. "He's beautiful." Then she turned and walked back down the aisle, disappearing into the rows of seats and strangers. Ethan watched her go. He didn't even know her name. An hour later, the plane touched down at JFK. Passengers gathered their belongings, eager to escape, but Ethan moved slowly. Liam was still asleep against his shoulder, peaceful in a way Ethan hadn't seen in months. He exited the plane in a daze, barely aware of the first-class lounge, the private car waiting outside, the assistant who met him at baggage claim with his schedule. All he could think about was her. The woman who'd stood up when no one else would, who'd held his son like he mattered, who'd looked at Ethan not with awe, ambition, or fear, but with something simpler: kindness. He stopped in the middle of the terminal, passengers flowing around him like water around stone. And for the first time since his wife died, Ethan Moore made a decision that had nothing to do with business, power, or control. He was going to find her. 3 days later, Ethan still couldn't stop thinking about her. He sat in his corner office on the 47th floor of Moore Enterprises, staring at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan stretched below him like a kingdom he'd conquered but never truly owned. Glass towers reflected the afternoon sun. Streets hummed with ambition. Everything moved, everything sparkled, everything meant nothing. His assistant, Marcus, stood by the door with a tablet, rattling off the day's agenda. The Singapore investors confirmed for Friday. Legal needs your signature on the Henderson merger, and your mother called again. She wants to know if you're bringing Liam to the charity gala next week. Ethan didn't respond. Marcus cleared his throat. Sir, cancel the gala. But cancel it. Ethan's voice was flat, final. Marcus hesitated, then nodded and left. Alone again, Ethan picked up his phone. He'd been doing this for 3 days, scrolling through the passenger manifest his security team had pulled from Flight 447. It was technically illegal, definitely unethical, but Ethan Moore didn't become a billionaire by following rules that inconvenienced him. There were 263 passengers on that flight. He'd narrowed it down to 47 women traveling alone. And then he'd stopped. Because what was he doing? Tracking down a stranger who'd shown his son basic human kindness. What did he expect? That she'd want to see him again? That she'd even remember him? He set the phone down and rubbed his face. Liam was with the nanny downstairs in the building's private daycare, another amenity Ethan had built but never truly appreciated until now. The baby had been sleeping better since the flight, eating better, almost happy. Ethan wasn't sure he remembered what that looked like. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Security flagged someone in the lobby asking about you. Should I send them away? Ethan frowned. Reporters, probably. Or another entrepreneur with a pitch. He started to type yes when a second message appeared. It's a woman. Says she found something that belongs to you on Flight 447. Ethan's heart stopped. He was out of his chair before he could think. The elevator ride down felt eternal. Ethan straightened his tie, then loosened it, then straightened it again. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man who looked composed, but his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with his cufflinks like a nervous teenager. The doors opened. Moore Enterprises' lobby was a cathedral of marble and steel, designed to intimidate. Most visitors looked small here, swallowed by the scale. But as Ethan stepped out, his eyes found her immediately. Grace Adams stood near the reception desk, clutching a small canvas bag, looking entirely out of place and somehow completely unbothered by it. She wore simple jeans and a soft blue sweater. Her hair was down today, falling past her shoulders. She was speaking quietly to the receptionist, who looked equal parts confused and suspicious. Ethan crossed the lobby in long strides. Grace. She turned, and her eyes widened slightly. Oh. Hi. Hi. Like they were old friends. Like this wasn't the strangest thing that had happened to him all week. The receptionist stood. Mr. Moore, I was just explaining to Miss... It's fine, Jennifer. Thank you. Ethan's eyes never left Grace. You found something of mine? Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a small stuffed elephant. Gray, worn soft from use, one ear slightly chewed. Your son dropped this, she said, when I gave him back to you on the plane. I didn't realize until I got home, and I thought, well, babies get attached to these things. I figured you might need it. Ethan stared at the elephant. Liam's elephant. The one his wife had bought the day she found out she was pregnant. the one Liam screamed for every night before bed. He'd been looking for this for 3 days. Ethan's throat tightened. I thought we'd lost it. You almost did. Grace smiled, that same soft, fleeting expression from the plane. I probably should have just mailed it, but I work nearby, so... You work near here? 2 blocks over, St. Catherine's Community Nursery. She shifted her bag. We take care of kids whose parents work multiple jobs or can't afford regular daycare. Of course she did. Ethan reached for the elephant, his fingers briefly brushing hers. The contact lasted half a second, but it felt like static electricity. Thank you, he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in months. Seriously, this means more than you know. Grace nodded, already stepping back toward the door. I'm glad I could help. Take care of him. She was leaving. Ethan's brain screamed at him to let her go, to be professional, to be appropriate, to not complicate things further. But his mouth said, Wait. Grace paused. Have you eaten lunch? She blinked. What? Lunch. Have you eaten? Ethan glanced at his watch. 1:47 p.m. I was about to grab something. You came all this way. It's the least I can do. Grace looked uncertain. You don't have to... I know. Ethan surprised himself by smiling slightly. But I'd like to, if you have time. For a moment, Grace just studied him, not with awe or calculation, but with that same gentle curiosity she'd had on the plane, like she was trying to understand something no one else could see. Finally, she smiled. Okay. Ethan took her to a deli, not the Michelin-starred restaurant 3 blocks away, where he usually entertained clients. Not the private club where CEOs made billion-dollar deals over Wagyu steak. A deli. Corner spot, checkered floors, laminated menus, the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Grace ordered a turkey sandwich. Ethan ordered the same because he genuinely couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten anything that didn't come from a catering company. They sat by the window, sunlight streaming through the glass, the city passing by outside. This is nice, Grace said, taking a bite. Simple. Simple, Ethan repeated like he was testing the word. You say it like it's foreign. It is. He set down his sandwich, barely touched. Everything in my life is complicated, calculated. Every meal is a meeting. Every conversation has an agenda. Grace tilted her head. Then why did you invite me to lunch? Good question. Ethan looked at her, really looked. No makeup, no designer clothes, no practiced charm. Just a woman eating a sandwich in a deli like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because you didn't want anything from me, he said quietly. On the plane, you didn't ask who I was, didn't take a photo, didn't perform. You just helped. Grace's expression softened. He's a baby. That's what you do. Most people don't. Then most people are missing the point. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a street musician played saxophone, the melody drifting through the cracked window. Someone laughed. A child ran past with a balloon. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd noticed any of this. What made you stand up? He asked suddenly. On the plane. You could have stayed in your seat like everyone else. Grace considered this, folding her napkin carefully. I lost my little brother when I was 19. He was only 4. Leukemia. Ethan's chest tightened. He used to cry like that, Grace continued, her voice steady but distant. When he was in pain, when he was scared, and all I could do was hold him and hope it was enough. She looked up, her brown eyes clear and honest. When I heard your son crying like that, I don't know, I just couldn't sit there. Ethan didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who turns grief into compassion, who sees suffering and moves toward it instead of away? I'm sorry, he finally managed. About your brother. Thank you, Grace smiled sadly. He taught me what matters. Presence, gentleness, showing up even when it's hard. Ethan looked down at his hands, hands that signed contracts, closed deals, built empires. Hands that didn't know how to hold his own son without feeling like he was breaking something. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Be a father. Be enough. My wife, she knew. She was warm and patient and everything I'm not. And when she died, He stopped, jaw tight. I don't know how to be what he needs. Grace reached across the table. She didn't touch him, just rested her hand on the table between them, close enough to be an offer. You showed up, she said gently. On that plane, exhausted and desperate, you didn't give up. You kept trying. That's love, Ethan, even when it doesn't feel like enough. It was the first time she'd said his name. It sounded different in her voice, less like a title, more like a person. Ethan stared at her hand on the table, and for the first time in a year, he didn't feel completely alone. 2 weeks later, Ethan did something he'd never done before. He took a Thursday afternoon off. No meetings, no calls, no assistant hovering with urgent matters that somehow always managed to be both critical and meaningless. Just him, Liam strapped to his chest in a carrier, walking down a street in Brooklyn he'd probably driven past 1,000 times, but never actually seen. St. Catherine's Community Nursery sat wedged between a laundromat and a corner bodega, its brick facade painted a cheerful yellow that was chipping at the edges. Hand-drawn butterflies decorated the windows. A small playground out front held swings that squeaked and a slide with a dent in the middle. It was nothing like the pristine air-conditioned daycare facility in his building. It was perfect. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, suddenly unsure. Grace had mentioned she worked here, but she hadn't exactly invited him to visit. What if this was crossing a line? What if she thought he was... The door burst open. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, with wild curly hair and paint-stained hands, ran out laughing. Behind her, Grace appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Maya, we use paint on paper, not on... She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on Ethan. Oh. The little girl crashed into Ethan's legs, looked up, and gasped. You have a baby. Ethan looked down at her, then at Grace, completely out of his depth. Grace walked over, gently guiding Maya back. Inside voices, remember? And Mr. Ethan is a visitor. Can I see the baby? Maya's eyes were enormous with wonder. Ethan glanced at Grace, who nodded with an encouraging smile. Sure, he said awkwardly, kneeling down so Maya could see. This is Liam. Maya peered at the baby with the intense scrutiny only children possess. Liam, awake and alert, stared back with equal curiosity. He's squishy, Maya announced. Very observant, Grace said, biting back a smile. She looked at Ethan. What brings you here? Ethan stood, suddenly aware of how absurd this must look. A man in a $1,500 suit standing outside a community nursery like he belonged there. I wanted to see where you work, he said honestly, and I thought maybe Liam should meet other kids. Get used to this. He gestured vaguely at the playground, the noise, the normalcy. Grace's expression softened. Come inside. The nursery was chaos in the best possible way. 20 children between ages 2 and 6 filled the space with color and sound, building block towers, finger painting at low tables, playing dress-up in a corner overflowing with costumes. The walls were covered with crayon drawings and alphabet posters. A bookshelf sagged under the weight of worn picture books. Everything was bright, loud, alive. Ethan felt like he'd stepped onto another planet. Grace led him through the room, pointing out different areas. "We're not fancy, but we're funded by donations and a few government grants. Most of our families work 2 or 3 jobs. We stay open late, offer meals, help with homework for the older kids." A little boy ran past, cape flying behind him. "I'm Superman!" "No running, Carlos," Grace called after him, but she was smiling. Ethan watched her move through the space like water, crouching to tie a shoelace, wiping a nose, settling a dispute over a toy truck, with the patience of someone who genuinely loved what she did. The children gravitated toward her naturally, like she was the sun and they were planets in orbit. She belonged here, and Ethan realized with uncomfortable clarity that he belonged nowhere. "You want to hold him?" Grace appeared beside him, nodding toward Liam. "He's fine in the carrier." "Ethan." Grace's voice was gentle but firm. "Let someone else hold your son for 5 minutes. You look like you're about to collapse." He wanted to argue, to say he was fine. But the truth was, he was exhausted. He'd been exhausted for a year, operating on adrenaline and obligation, holding everything together with sheer force of will. Slowly, he unclipped the carrier and lifted Liam out. Grace took the baby with practiced ease, settling him on her hip like she'd done it 1,000 times. Liam immediately grabbed a fistful of her sweater, content. "See?" Grace said. "He's happy, and you're still standing. Progress." Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. "I don't know how you do this," he said quietly. "Stay so present, so patient." Grace bounced Liam gently, her gaze drifting around the room. "These kids don't have much. Most of them go home to overcrowded apartments, parents too tired to play, neighborhoods that aren't always safe. But here, for a few hours, they get to just be kids." She looked at Ethan. "That's worth everything." A small voice interrupted them. "Miss Grace?" They turned. A little boy stood nearby, maybe 3 years old, holding a stuffed dinosaur with one eye missing. His name tag read Oliver in careful handwriting. "What's up, Ollie?" Grace knelt down, still holding Liam. Oliver's bottom lip trembled. "I miss my mama." Grace's entire expression melted. She set Liam carefully in a nearby playpen, then opened her arms. Oliver collapsed into them and she held him. No words, no platitudes, just presence. Ethan watched, frozen. This was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, just showing up, staying, holding someone while they hurt. After a moment, Oliver pulled back, wiping his eyes. Grace brushed his hair from his forehead. "Your mama loves you so much," she said softly. "She's working hard so you can have good things. But you know what? She's thinking about you right now. She's always thinking about you." Oliver nodded, squeezing his dinosaur. "You want to help me feed the fish?" Grace asked. "They're probably hungry." Oliver's face brightened. "Okay." Grace stood, took his hand, and led him to a small aquarium in the corner. Ethan could hear them talking, Grace asking questions, Oliver chattering about his favorite fish, the sadness already fading. Ethan looked down at Liam in the playpen. His son was watching the other children with wide eyes, absorbing everything. And Ethan realized something devastating. He'd been so focused on survival, on maintaining control, that he'd forgotten to actually live. An hour later, most of the children had been picked up. Grace was wiping down tables while Ethan sat on a tiny chair, knees practically to his chest, holding Liam and reading a picture book about a caterpillar. He felt ridiculous. He probably looked ridiculous, but Liam was smiling. Actually smiling. "You're a natural," Grace said, walking over with 2 juice boxes. Ethan snorted. I'm sitting in a chair made for toddlers reading about a very hungry caterpillar. I'm many things. Natural isn't one of them. Grace handed him a juice box. Apple or fruit punch? He stared at it. Is this dinner? It's 4:30. It's a snack. She sat down across from him in an equally small chair, sipping her own juice box with complete seriousness. And for the record, you're doing better than you think. Ethan set down the book. Liam immediately grabbed for it and Ethan let him. My wife would have loved this place, he said suddenly. The words surprised even him. He never talked about her. Never. But something about this space, about Grace, made the walls come down. She was a pediatric nurse. She wanted to open a clinic for underprivileged families after Liam was old enough. Grace's eyes were soft. She sounds incredible. She was. Ethan's jaw tightened. And I was always working, building the next project, closing the next deal. She'd beg me to take a day off, to just be with her, and I'd promise next week or next month. And then he stopped. Grace waited, not pushing, not filling the silence. She died giving birth to him, Ethan finally said, his voice raw. Complications. They tried everything, but she was gone in hours. And the last thing I said to her before surgery was, I'll be there as soon as this meeting ends. The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. I chose a meeting over the birth of my son. Ethan. She never blamed me. Even at the end, she just smiled and said, Go be brilliant, like she always did. Like she always believed I was something I'm not. He looked down at Liam, who was gnawing on the corner of the book, oblivious. And now I have this perfect little human who deserves so much better than a father who doesn't know how to love him. Grace set down her juice box. She moved to Ethan's chair, kneeling beside it so they were eye level. Listen to me, she said, her voice quiet but iron strong. You didn't choose wrong. You made a decision based on what you knew in that moment. You're not a villain. You're a man who lost someone he loved, and you're trying to survive it. She put her hand on his arm. But Ethan, your son doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be here, present, trying, and you are. Ethan's vision blurred. He couldn't remember the last time someone had said his pain was valid, that his failure didn't define him, that he was allowed to be broken and still be enough. A tear slid down his cheek before he could stop it. Grace didn't look away. She just squeezed his arm gently. It's okay, she whispered. You're okay. And for the first time in a year, Ethan almost believed it. Ethan Moore was a problem solver. It's what made him a billionaire by 30. When something was broken, you fixed it. When something was inefficient, you optimized it. When someone needed help, you wrote a check. So that's exactly what he did. 3 days after visiting St. Catherine's, Ethan sent his CFO to assess the nursery's financial situation. 2 days after that, he had his legal team draft a proposal. And 1 week later, he arrived at the nursery with a leather portfolio and a plan that would solve everything. He found Grace in the playground, pushing a little girl on the swings. Higher! The girl squealed. Grace laughed, pushing harder, her face bright in the afternoon sun. She looked so different from the boardrooms Ethan lived in, unpolished, genuine, free. She spotted him and waved, slowing the swing. Hey, I didn't know you were coming by. I wanted to talk to you about something, Ethan said, holding up the portfolio. Something important. They sat in Grace's tiny office, really just a converted storage room with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered in children's artwork. Ethan opened the portfolio, sliding documents across the desk. I've been thinking about St. Catherine's, he said, his voice taking on the smooth, confident tone of a pitch. About what you're doing here and how much further you could go with proper resources. Grace picked up the first page, scanning it. Her eyebrows rose. What is this? A proposal. More enterprises would like to fund a complete renovation of the facility, new playground equipment, updated classrooms, commercial kitchen, proper HVAC system. We'd also establish a trust fund to cover operational costs for the next 10 years, expand your capacity from 20 children to 60, and provide scholarships for staff training. Grace stared at the numbers. Her hands trembled slightly. Ethan, this is $2 million. 2.3 actually, plus annual operational funding. He leaned forward, excitement building. Grace, you could help 3 times as many families, hire more teachers, offer after-school programs, maybe even medical services. This place could be a real community hub. Grace set down the papers slowly. Why? She asked quietly. Ethan blinked. What do you mean, why? Because you need it. Because these kids deserve better. Because I can actually do something that matters for once instead of just building another luxury high-rise nobody needs. But it's my work, Grace said, her voice careful. Our work. The community built this place together, piece by piece, donation by donation. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And it could be so much more. Ethan gestured to the papers. Grace, you're barely keeping the lights on. Last month you used your own paycheck to buy art supplies, I checked. Grace's expression changed, something flickering across her face that Ethan couldn't read. You investigated us? I did research. There's a difference. Is there? Grace stood, crossing her arms. Ethan, did you ask me what we needed? Did you ask what the families wanted? Or did you just decide you knew better and threw money at it? Ethan stood too, frustration rising. I'm trying to help you. No. Grace's voice was quiet but firm. You're trying to fix me. There's a difference. The words hit like a slap. That's not... Ethan stopped, jaw tight. You work 16-hour days for poverty wages. You sacrifice everything for these kids. I'm offering you the resources to actually make a real difference, and you're offended. I'm not offended. I'm sad. Grace's eyes were bright with emotion. Because you still don't understand. This isn't about efficiency or optimization or scaling up. It's about presence. About showing up every day and being enough even when it's hard. You can't buy that, Ethan. You have to live it. So what, I'm supposed to just watch you struggle? Watch these kids go without because accepting help would somehow compromise your purity? That's not what You're being stubborn and prideful, and you're hurting the very people you claim to care about. The words exploded out of him, sharp and cruel. The office went silent. Grace stared at him, hurt flashing across her face, before she carefully, deliberately smoothed it away. You should go, she said quietly. Grace, please. Just go. Ethan grabbed the portfolio, his hands shaking with anger, and something else he couldn't name. He wanted to apologize, wanted to take it back, but his pride was a wall he didn't know how to climb. So he left. The story hit the press 2 days later. Billionaire CEO courts nursery worker, gold digger or good Samaritan. The article was vicious. It had photos, Ethan entering the nursery, Grace with Liam, the two of them at the deli. Someone had been following them. Someone had been watching. The narrative was simple and devastating. Calculating woman targets wealthy widower, uses his grief to manipulate her way into his life, angling for a payday disguised as charity work. They called her a fraud, a schemer, a poverty princess playing the long game. Ethan's phone exploded with calls. His publicist, his lawyers, his mother demanding to know what he was thinking. The board wanted a statement. Investors were concerned about his judgment. But all Ethan could think about was Grace. He tried calling her 17 times. She didn't answer. He sent texts. Nothing. He showed up at the nursery. The door was locked, a handwritten sign reading, "Closed for emergency repairs." Marcus appeared in his office doorway, tablet in hand. "Sir, the PR team has drafted 3 responses. They're recommending we find her," Ethan said. "Sir? Grace Adams. Find out where she lives. I need to see her." Marcus hesitated. "With respect, sir, that might not be wise. The optics. I don't care about the optics." Ethan slammed his hand on the desk. "I care about making this right." But Marcus was already shaking his head. "Sir, you need to see this." He turned the tablet around. It was a video, shaky, filmed on someone's phone. Grace leaving her apartment, reporters swarming her like piranhas, microphones in her face, cameras flashing. "Miss Adams, is it true you targeted Ethan Moore? How much money have you asked him for? Are you using his dead wife's memory to manipulate him?" Grace's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She tried to push through, but they surrounded her, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusation. "Please," Grace said, barely audible, "I just need to get to work. Is the nursery just a front? A way to look charitable?" Someone shoved a camera too close. Grace flinched, stumbling backward, and then the video cut off. Ethan's blood ran cold. "When was this?" "This morning. It's already been viewed 2 million times." Ethan was out of his chair, grabbing his coat. "Get the car, now." "Sir, your 3 o'clock. Cancel everything." But he was too late. By the time Ethan arrived at Grace's apartment, a modest walk-up in Queens, she was gone. Her neighbor, an elderly woman with kind eyes, answered his frantic knocking. "She left this morning," the woman said. "Packed a bag, crying, said she needed to disappear for a while. Those reporters..." She shook her head sadly. "They were like animals." "Did she say where she was going?" "No. But she asked me to water her plants. Said she didn't know when she'd be back." The woman studied Ethan. "You're him, aren't you? The one from the news?" Ethan's throat was tight. "I never meant for this to happen." "Didn't you?" The woman's voice wasn't unkind, just honest. "Men like you think you can control everything, fix everything, but some things are delicate, and when you grab them too hard, they break." She closed the door gently. Ethan stood in the hallway, the words echoing. "You can't buy kindness. You have to live it." Grace had tried to tell him, tried to show him, and he'd responded with arrogance and money, and the assumption that he knew better. He pulled out his phone, dialing her number one more time. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then, finally, "The number you have reached is no longer in service." Ethan lowered the phone. For the first time in his life, all his money, all his power, all his control meant absolutely nothing. He'd lost her, and this time, he'd done it to himself. That night, Ethan sat in Liam's nursery, holding his son in the dark. The baby was asleep, peaceful, trusting, completely unaware that his father was falling apart. Ethan looked down at the tiny face, his wife's nose, her gentle expression, the innocent belief that the world was safe and good. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything." The elephant Grace had returned, sat on the shelf watching, a reminder of the woman who'd shown him what love actually looked like, and the man who'd been too blind to see it until it was gone. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the windows like all the tears Ethan couldn't cry. He held his son closer, and for the first time in his entire adult life, Ethan Moore had absolutely no idea what to do next. 3 weeks passed like years. Ethan stopped going to the office. His assistant handled everything remotely, signing documents via email, attending board meetings via video call that he mostly muted. His mother threatened to stage an intervention. His therapist, whom he'd avoided for months, left increasingly concerned voicemails. He didn't care. Every day followed the same pattern. Wake up, take care of Liam, stare at his phone hoping Grace would call, fail to eat, fail to sleep, fail to be anything resembling functional. The media circus had moved on to the next scandal, but the damage was done. St. Catherine's had closed temporarily, the board citing restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. The donations had dried up. Parents had pulled their kids. Grace's name had been dragged through enough mud that even goodwill couldn't survive it. And it was all his fault. Ethan had tried everything. He'd hired private investigators to find her. They came back empty. He'd called every hospital, shelter, and community center in the tri-state area. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air, and maybe that's exactly what she'd needed to do, to escape him. The thought made him sick. It was a Thursday afternoon, grey, cold, the kind of November day that felt like the world was giving up, when Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. His heart stopped. He answered before the second ring. Grace? A pause. Then a male voice, tired and professional. Is this Ethan Moore? Yes, who is this? This is Dr. Patel from Queen's General Hospital. I'm calling about Grace Adams. You're listed as her emergency contact. The world tilted. What happened? Ethan was already grabbing his coat, his keys, his mind racing through 1,000 terrible possibilities. Is she okay? She was brought in 2 hours ago. Severe pneumonia, dehydration, exhaustion. She collapsed at a homeless shelter where she'd been volunteering. We're treating her now, but the doctor hesitated. She's asking for you. Ethan broke every traffic law getting there. He left Liam with his nanny, promising he'd be back soon, knowing it was a lie because he had no idea what he was walking into. The hospital was a maze of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell, and the particular kind of quiet that exists only in places where people fight to stay alive. Dr. Patel met him outside the ICU, a small man with gentle eyes and exhaustion written in every line of his face. She's stable, he said immediately, reading the panic on Ethan's face. But she's been running herself into the ground for weeks. Her immune system is compromised. She needs rest, fluids, and frankly, she needs to stop trying to save the world for 5 minutes. Can I see her? Dr. Patel studied him. She specifically asked for you. I don't know what happened between you two, and frankly, it's none of my business. But that woman in there, she's one of the good ones. So whatever you're about to do, make sure it's for her benefit, not yours. Ethan nodded, shame burning in his chest. The doctor led him down the hallway and stopped outside room 427. 10 minutes, he said. She needs to rest. Ethan pushed open the door. Grace looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Her skin was pale, almost translucent against the white sheets. An IV dripped steadily into her arm. Monitors beeped softly, tracking rhythms Ethan didn't understand, but desperately needed to stay steady. Her hair was pulled back, revealing dark circles under her eyes and cheekbones that looked sharper than he remembered. She looked fragile. She looked broken. And it was his fault. Ethan crossed to the chair beside her bed and sat down carefully, like any sudden movement might shatter what remained. Grace, he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, those warm brown eyes that had seen him at his worst and somehow still found something worth caring about. You came, she said, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. Of course I came. Ethan's throat was tight. Grace, what happened? Where have you been? She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they were wet. I've been trying to fix things. After the news broke, St. Catherine's lost everything. Funding, families, trust. So I've been working with other shelters, trying to place the kids, helping families find new daycare, volunteering wherever they'd take me. She coughed, wincing. I couldn't let them suffer because of me. Because of me, Ethan corrected, his voice breaking. This is my fault, all of it. The investigation, the proposal, the media. I did this to you. I destroyed everything you built because I was too arrogant to listen. Ethan. No. Please. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was praying to someone he didn't believe in. You tried to tell me. You said I couldn't buy kindness, that I had to live it. And instead of hearing you, I got defensive. I lashed out. I called you stubborn and prideful when the truth is, you're the bravest person I've ever met. A tear slid down Grace's cheek. I'm not brave, she whispered. I'm terrified. All the time. Terrified of failing the kids, of not being enough, of... She stopped, looking away. Of being seen the way those articles described me. Like I'm some kind of opportunist who uses people's pain for personal gain. You're nothing like that. Aren't I? Grace's voice was raw. I let myself care about you, about Liam, and maybe part of me knew it was dangerous, that our worlds don't mix, that someone like you and someone like me... She shook her head. But I did it anyway. And look what happened. Ethan reached for her hand, slowly giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers were cold and small in his, but they held on. I don't have worlds, Ethan said quietly. I have walls. Towers made of glass and steel and money that keep everyone at a distance so I never have to feel anything. And then you showed up on a plane and held my son, and for the first time in a year, I felt human. He squeezed her hand gently. You didn't use my pain, Grace. You saw it. You sat with it. You didn't try to fix me. You just showed me what it looked like to be present. And I threw that back in your face because I didn't know how to receive something I couldn't control or purchase. Grace's tears fell faster now. I've spent my whole life thinking success meant building bigger, climbing higher, acquiring more, Ethan continued. And I was miserable. My wife died thinking I valued boardrooms more than her. My son barely knew me. I was surrounded by everything and connected to nothing. He brought her hand to his forehead, bowing over it. And then you showed me a different way, a better way. And I'm so sorry I didn't understand it until I lost you. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the sound of Grace's ragged breathing. You didn't lose me, she finally said. Ethan looked up, hope and fear warring in his chest. Grace smiled, weak but real. I'm right here. Ethan stayed. Not for 10 minutes. Not for an hour. He stayed through the evening, through the night shift change, through the grey dawn that crept through the hospital windows like an apology. He didn't talk much, didn't try to fix anything or make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He just stayed. When Grace was thirsty, he helped her drink water. When she was cold, he adjusted the blanket. When she cried from exhaustion and frustration and the weight of everything that had happened, he pulled his chair closer and held her hand and let her be sad without trying to talk her out of it. This was what she'd tried to teach him. This was what he'd been too blind to see. Love wasn't grand gestures or expensive solutions. It was showing up. It was staying. It was being present in the pain instead of trying to eliminate it. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Grace fell into a deeper sleep. Her breathing evened out, the tension in her face finally easing. Ethan watched her, still holding her hand. His phone buzzed, 17 unread messages, 4 missed calls, a world of responsibilities he'd abandoned. He turned it off. None of it mattered. Not the company, not the deals, not the empire he'd built from ambition and loneliness. This mattered. This woman. This moment. Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway, checking charts. He glanced at Ethan, then at their joined hands, and nodded with something that looked like approval. "She'll be okay," the doctor said quietly. "A few more days of rest and treatment, and she can go home." "Thank you," Ethan said. "Don't thank me. Just don't let her do this again." Dr. Patel's expression was serious. "She's been carrying the world on her shoulders. She needs someone to share the weight." The doctor left. Ethan looked down at Grace's sleeping face. Peaceful now, finally at rest. And for the first time in his life, Ethan more understood what it meant to love someone. Not possessing them, not fixing them, not controlling the outcome. Just being there, present, human, enough. He leaned forward and whispered into the quiet room, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Grace's fingers tightened slightly around his. She'd heard him, and that was enough. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the hospital window, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, tentative, gentle, promising. A new day, a second chance, a beginning. 6 months later, everything had changed. And nothing had changed. Ethan still lived in the penthouse overlooking Manhattan, but now there were colorful toys scattered across the pristine marble floors. The minimalist living room had been invaded by a playmat, building blocks, and a small army of stuffed animals. The kitchen, once used only by his private chef, now smelled like burnt toast and baby food most mornings. His corner office at Moore Enterprises remained exactly the same. Glass, steel, city views that stretched to infinity. But the man sitting behind the desk was different. Ethan ended his video call with the Singapore investors and checked his watch, 4:47 p.m. He was supposed to pick up Liam from St. Catherine's by 5:30. St. Catherine's. It had taken 3 months, but they'd rebuilt it. Not with Ethan's money, not directly anyway. Instead, he'd used his connections to organize a proper fundraising campaign, worked with Grace and the board to identify what the community actually needed, and then stepped back. He donated anonymously, along with hundreds of others who believed in what Grace was building. The new St. Catherine's was bright, safe, and filled with the same chaotic love as before. Just more of it. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Sir, the Anderson account needs your signature and the Times wants a comment on the merger." "Handle Anderson. Tell the Times I'll give them a statement tomorrow." Ethan was already packing his briefcase. "I need to leave." Marcus smiled. He'd been smiling a lot more these days. "Picking up Liam?" "And Grace. We're taking him to the park. That's the 4th time this week you've left before 6. Is that a problem?" "No, sir." Marcus's smile widened. "It's progress." St. Catherine's playground was full of children when Ethan arrived. He spotted Grace immediately, sitting cross-legged on a blanket, surrounded by 4 kids who were supposedly listening to a story but were mostly just climbing on her. She wore simple jeans and a yellow sweater, her hair pulled back in that messy way that meant she'd been too busy to fuss with it. She looked beautiful. Liam sat in her lap, babbling happily and grabbing at the book pages. At 11 months old, he was all chubby cheeks and curious eyes, and an infectious giggle that made everyone around him smile. Ethan watched them for a moment. This woman who'd saved his life without even trying, holding his son like he was the most precious thing in the world. His heart did something complicated in his chest. "Dada!" Liam spotted him and immediately reached out with both arms. Grace looked up, her face lighting up in that way that still made Ethan forget how to breathe properly. "Hey," she said. "You're early. Figured we could use the extra time." Ethan crouched down, letting Liam launch himself into his arms. The baby grabbed his tie immediately, trying to put it in his mouth. "Plus, I have something to show you." Grace's eyebrows rose. "Should I be worried?" "Maybe. Come on." 20 minutes later, They were standing in front of a building 3 blocks from St. Catherine's. It was old brick, 5 stories with wide windows and a faded sign that read, "Riverside Medical Center closed 2019. Grace stared at it, confused. "Ethan, what is this?" Ethan shifted Liam to his other hip. "You remember Dr. Patel from Queen's General?" "Of course, he saved my life. He called me 2 months ago, said he was tired of working in overcrowded hospitals where people waited 8 hours to be seen. Said he wanted to open a community health center but couldn't get funding." Ethan pulled out a key. "So I bought this building. Well, technically a non-profit. I bought it. Dr. Patel is going to run it." Grace's eyes went wide. "Ethan, wait." He unlocked the door. "You need to see the inside first." They stepped into a lobby that was still under construction. Drop cloths, paint cans, the smell of fresh drywall. But beyond that, Grace could see the bones of something incredible. Large waiting room with natural light, examination rooms, a space marked pediatrics, another labeled Community Resource Center. "It opens in 2 months, Ethan said. "Free medical care for anyone who needs it. No insurance required. Dr. Patel is hiring a full staff, nurses, doctors, specialists. And there's going to be a childcare center on the 2nd floor so parents can bring their kids to appointments without worrying." Grace walked slowly through the space, her hand trailing along the walls, taking it all in. "This is incredible," she whispered. "There's more." Ethan led her to a door at the back. It opened into a smaller room, already finished, painted a soft blue, with bookshelves and comfortable chairs and windows overlooking a small garden. A plaque beside the door read, "The Grace Adams Community Room." Grace stopped breathing. "This is where we'll hold parenting classes, support groups, grief counseling, whatever the community needs," Ethan said quietly. "Dr. Patel insisted on naming it after you. Said you were the one who taught him that medicine isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about seeing the whole person." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't teach him that. You teach everyone that." Ethan set Liam down carefully. The baby immediately crawled toward a sunbeam on the floor, fascinated. "You taught me." Grace turned to look at him. "Ethan." "I spent my whole life building things that meant nothing," Ethan said. "Towers full of people who paid millions for apartments they barely lived in, shopping centers that pushed out local businesses. I told myself I was creating value, but I was just creating more." He stepped closer to her. "And then you showed me what actually matters. Presence, connection, showing up for people, not because it benefits you, but because it's right." "You didn't need me to teach you that," Grace said softly. "You just needed permission to be human." "Maybe." Ethan smiled slightly. "But you gave me that permission. You held my son when no one else would. You sat with me in a hospital when I deserved to be alone. You showed me that strength isn't about control. It's about vulnerability. It's about admitting you don't have all the answers and asking for help anyway." Liam babbled something that sounded vaguely like a word, and they both glanced over. He was pulling himself up on a chair, wobbling but determined. "He's going to walk soon," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know." Ethan watched his son with something that felt dangerously close to peace. "And I'm going to be there when he does. Not in a meeting, not checking my phone, just there." Grace wiped her eyes. "How did we get here? 6 months ago, we were strangers on a plane." "You were never a stranger," Ethan looked at her. "From the moment you stood up in that aisle, you saw me. Not the money or the reputation or the walls I'd built, just me. And I've spent the last 6 months trying to become someone worthy of being seen that way." "Ethan, you always were—" "No." His voice was firm but gentle. "I wasn't. I was empty. I was broken. I was drowning, and I didn't even know it. But you—" He took a breath. You threw me a lifeline. And then you taught me how to swim." They stood in silence for a moment, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, Liam's happy babbling filling the space between words. "I'm not perfect," Ethan said finally. "I still work too much sometimes. I still try to fix things with money when I should just listen. I'm still learning how to be a father, how to be present, how to be—" He paused. "How to be the kind of man my son deserves. The kind of man you deserve." Grace's breath caught. "But I'm trying," Ethan continued. "Every day I'm trying. Because of you. Because you showed me what a life full of meaning looks like, and I can't go back to the emptiness now that I've felt this." Grace stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face gently. "You're not empty, Ethan. You never were. You were just lost. And you found me." "No." Grace smiled through her tears. "You found yourself. I just held your hand while you did." Ethan covered her hand with his, holding it against his cheek. "Grace, Liam chose that exact moment to fall on his bottom with a surprised squeak. They both turned, ready to comfort him, but he just laughed. That pure, delighted baby laugh that sounds like joy itself. Grace and Ethan looked at each other and laughed too. And in that moment, standing in an unfinished room with paint-stained floors and a future that was still being built, Ethan realized something profound. Happiness wasn't something you achieved or acquired. It was something you chose. Every day, in the small moments, in the presence, in the love. That evening, the three of them sat in the small garden behind the medical center. Someone had planted flowers there years ago, and they'd somehow survived the neglect, wild and imperfect and beautiful. Liam sat between them on a blanket, examining a dandelion with intense concentration. "I'm giving a speech next week," Ethan said suddenly. "At a business summit. They want me to talk about success." Grace glanced at him. "What are you going to say?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching Liam try to eat the dandelion. "I'm going to tell them the truth," he said finally, "that I spent 30 years building an empire and lost myself in the process. That I measured my worth in dollars and square footage and deals closed. That I thought success meant never needing anyone." He looked at Grace. "And then I met someone who showed me that real wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts. It's measured in moments like this, in showing up, in being present, in loving people not for what they can give you, but for who they are." Grace's eyes glistened. "That's beautiful." "It's true." Ethan reached over, taking her hand. "Wealth means nothing if your heart is poor, and my heart was bankrupt until you taught me how to fill it." Grace squeezed his hand. Liam, oblivious to the significance of the moment, successfully destroyed the dandelion and looked immensely proud of himself. They laughed again, the sound carrying across the garden and into the evening air. Above them, the sky turned pink and gold, and somewhere in the city, life continued its chaotic dance. But here, in this quiet corner, three people sat together, present, connected, enough. 1 year later. The plane touched down at JFK just as the sun began to set, the sky painted in shades of amber and rose, the kind of light that makes everything look softer, more forgiving. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt and looked down at Liam, who was strapped into the seat beside him. The toddler, now 18 months old, all energy and curiosity and unstoppable determination, was trying to unbuckle himself, tiny fingers fumbling with the clasp. "Hold on, buddy, we're almost there." Liam looked up at him with those wide eyes, his mother's eyes, and smiled. "Dada, out. I know. 2 more minutes." Across the aisle, Grace was helping an elderly woman retrieve her bag from the overhead compartment. The woman thanked her profusely, and Grace just smiled that gentle smile and said something that made the woman laugh. Ethan watched her, still amazed after all this time that she'd chosen this life, chosen him. The past year had been everything and nothing like he'd expected. There had been challenges, learning to balance work with presence, navigating what it meant to build a relationship while co-parenting, dealing with the occasional tabloid article that still tried to paint them as some kind of scandalous mismatch. There had been arguments about small things and big things, moments of doubt and fear and uncertainty. But there had also been mornings waking up to Liam's laughter, evenings in the park watching the sun set, while their son discovered the world one blade of grass at a time, quiet moments reading on the couch while Grace graded papers from the early childhood education classes she'd started teaching, Sundays at St. Catherine's where Liam was simultaneously loved and spoiled by 20 children who considered him part of the family. There had been life, real, messy, beautiful life. The kind Ethan hadn't known existed until a shy woman stood up on a plane and changed everything. They collected their bags and made their way through the terminal, the same terminal where Ethan had stood a year ago, desperate to find the woman who'd held his son. Now she walked beside him, carrying Liam's backpack and singing softly to herself, completely unaware that people were staring. Not because they recognized them, most people didn't, but because they radiated something that was increasingly rare in airports: contentment. "Ice cream," Liam announced suddenly, pointing at a shop they were passing. "We just had dinner on the plane," Ethan said. "Ice cream," Liam insisted, louder this time. Grace laughed. "He definitely gets the persistence from you." "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm extremely flexible and easygoing." "Uh-huh." Grace's eyes sparkled. "Is that why you reorganized my entire kitchen last month because the cups were in the wrong cabinet?" "They were objectively in the wrong cabinet. Who puts cups above the stove?" "Someone who's been living alone for 10 years and has a system that works perfectly fine." "Worked," Ethan corrected, grinning. "Past tense, it's been upgraded." Grace shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're impossible. And yet, you love me anyway." The words came out casually, but they landed with weight. Because it was true, and they both knew it, even though they'd been dancing around saying it out loud for months, waiting for the right moment, the right words, the right... "I do," Grace said quietly, stopping in the middle of the terminal. Ethan stopped too, Liam squirming in his arms. "What?" Grace looked up at him, her brown eyes clear and certain. "I love you. Anyway. Despite the cabinet reorganization and the fact that you still try to schedule spontaneity like it's a board meeting. I love you." Ethan's heart did that complicated thing again, the thing it had been doing ever since he met her, part hope, part terror, part overwhelming gratitude that the universe had been kind enough to put her in his path. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. "I have for months. I just didn't want to pressure me, I know." Grace reached up, touching his face gently. "But Ethan, you don't pressure me. You see me. You show up. You try. That's all I've ever wanted." Around them, people hurried past with their luggage and their phones and their destinations. But Ethan and Grace stood still, creating a small island of stillness in the chaos. "Ice cream," Liam reminded them, completely unconcerned with the emotional significance of the moment. They laughed, breaking the spell, and continued walking. But everything had shifted. Everything was different now. They ended up at the ice cream shop, because when you're 18 months old, persistence pays off. Liam sat in a high chair, demolishing a cup of vanilla with both hands, while Grace tried half-heartedly to keep him clean. Ethan sat across from them, drinking coffee that was too bitter, but somehow tasted perfect, just watching. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Board meeting moved to Thursday. Also, the community center opened today. Dr. Patel says the line went around the block." Ethan smiled, typing back, "Good, keep me updated." A year ago, he would have cancelled dinner plans to attend that opening. would have needed to be there to control it, to make sure everything was perfect. Now he knew the truth. The best things happened when you stepped back and let other people shine. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, finally giving up on keeping Liam clean and just accepting the inevitable ice cream disaster. "How different everything is," Ethan said. "A year ago, I was sitting in my office at midnight, closing a deal that would make me another few $1,000,000 I didn't need. Liam was with a nanny I'd hired but barely knew. I was successful and empty, and so lonely I couldn't even name it." Grace reached across the table, her hand sticky with ice cream, and took his. "And now?" "Now I'm in an airport ice cream shop watching my son eat with his hands, while the woman I love tries to stop him from painting himself completely vanilla." Ethan squeezed her hand. "And I've never been happier." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, I mean it." He leaned forward. "You saved my life, Grace. Not dramatically. You didn't pull me from a burning building or donate a kidney. You just showed me what it looked like to be present, to be human, to measure success not in acquisitions but in moments, in showing up, in loving people for who they are, not what they can give you." "You saved your own life," Grace said softly. "You did the work. You changed. You became the father Liam deserves and the man you wanted to be. I just walked beside you while you did." "You did more than that." Ethan brought her hand to his lips, kissing her sticky fingers without hesitation. "You showed me that real wealth has nothing to do with money. It's this, right here, messy and imperfect and so full of love, I can barely breathe sometimes." Liam chose that moment to sneeze, spraying vanilla ice cream across the table. They both stared at him. Then they burst out laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from joy and exhaustion, and the beautiful absurdity of life with a toddler. "Definitely your son," Grace said, wiping ice cream off her sweater. "Our son," Ethan corrected gently. Grace looked at him, surprise and hope flickering across her face. "I know we haven't talked about it officially," Ethan said. "But Grace, you've been more of a mother to him than anyone. You show up. You stay. You love him unconditionally. That makes you his mother in every way that matters." Grace covered her mouth, tears spilling over. "Ethan, Mama," Liam said suddenly, reaching for Grace. They both froze. It was the first time he'd said it. Grace pulled him into her arms, holding him close while she cried. Happy tears, overwhelmed tears, tears that came from being seen and chosen and loved in ways she'd never dared to hope for. Ethan watched them, his heart so full it hurt. This was everything. This was enough. This was home. Later that night, after Liam was asleep in his crib and the apartment was finally quiet, Ethan and Grace stood by the window overlooking the city. The light stretched out below them, millions of people living their lives, chasing their dreams, searching for meaning. "Do you ever miss it?" Grace asked quietly. "The old life, the simplicity of only thinking about yourself." Ethan thought about it honestly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It was easier, less complicated, less vulnerable." He turned to her. "But it was also empty. And I'd rather have complicated and full than simple and hollow." Grace leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being brave enough to change, for showing Liam what a good man looks like, for—" She paused. "For choosing this. Choosing us." "Grace." Ethan turned her to face him. "You're the easiest choice I've ever made." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises neither of them needed to speak out loud. Because some things didn't need words. Some things just needed presence. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. But inside, in a penthouse that had once been a monument to loneliness, 3 people slept. A man who'd learned that true wealth was measured in love, not dollars. A woman who'd taught him that the bravest thing you can do is show up, even when it's hard. And a little boy who would grow up knowing he was loved, completely unconditionally enough. He thought it was just one last flight, but it became the beginning of everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because sometimes the richest hearts are the ones that finally learn to give. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones brave enough to be vulnerable. And sometimes everything changes the moment someone decides to stand up. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up, staying, trying. It's about choosing every single day to be human.